Hello and welcome to another edition of Miles to Go. I'm Miles O'Brien. Today, Leroy Chiao, a great friend of mine, an astronaut of great accomplishment as well, part of the astronaut class of 1990, the so-called hairballs, a name he proudly gave them. He's flown on 4 missions in all, commanded the International Space Station, and played a key role in the early partnership between NASA and the Russian Space Agency. Our conversation comes in 3 acts. We talked first about the unlikely partnership between the former Cold War space rivals of the Soviet Union and the United States, and how that evolved into building the International Space Station. He had a front row seat to all of that. Then Act 2 will pivot into the Butch and Suni saga, the reality of their quote-unquote stranding, and the real psychological and physiological effects of long-term spaceflight. And finally, Act 3, we move into NASA's woes, its many failures to launch, and how things might change in a second Trump administration. So without further ado, here's my good friend Leroy Chiao, Act 1, an unlikely partnership and an unexpected mission. Leroy, it is always a pleasure to talk to you and good to see you again. You look great, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Great talking to you, too. And you look great, too.
Well, we're still standing.
I think we both have a little bit more of the gray, but that's about it.
I got you by about a year, but, we're still standing.
Yeah.
When you first came on as an astronaut, you probably wouldn't have been thinking about a long-duration space flight and perhaps going to Russia, for example. That whole scenario unfolded after you signed on, right?
Yes, very much so. So we were working on Space Station Freedom at the time, which started in 1984 or 85. I think it was 84. And, that was going along. It was having programmatic problems. It was having budget issues. And so Space Station seemed a long ways off. And we were focused on flying shuttles. It was when I came in 1990, it had only been a little over 4 years since the Challenger accident. And we had just started flying again a couple years after that. And so really came in as the space shuttle program started to really hit its stride and hit that sweet spot. So we were focused on getting shuttle missions, hopefully sooner rather than later, and maybe even one day getting a chance to go out and do a spacewalk.
So history unfolds, and all of a sudden there's a partnership with the Russians. When you first saw that happening, I know a lot of people inside NASA were a little bit skeptical about how that relationship would work. What were your thoughts at the time?
Sure. Well, I was a child of the Cold War. I was born in 1960, so pretty much indoctrinated in the American propaganda of the evil Soviets and how awful they were and how inferior they were. And so when, right around the time I was getting ready to fly my first flight in summer of 1994, that's when suddenly we were inviting the Russians into the reformed space station program, and of course the office back then was dominated by military pilots who, had stronger feelings than I did about our former Soviet counterparts. And so really there was kind of the furrowing of the brow and kind of a negative opinion about working with them. Well, why are we doing this? We're just going to end up throwing a lot of money their way. Our stuff's better than theirs anyway. Why are we doing this? But I have to say, on my first trip over there, I believe it was 96 when I went over there for the first time. And I was sent over as an EVA specialist to, learn about their systems, learn about their spacesuit, learn about how they do things. And I will say that I was pleasantly surprised. First of all, a lot of the folks I met were very nice people, open and, not that different than we were. And when it really counted, they did things right. It actually worked, but there was interesting to also see the design philosophy differences between the East and the West. Like, for example, they use a lot of mechanical systems for things, including their launch pad. You look at their launch pad, they have the arms that kind of hold the vehicle in place and the huge counterweights that swing these things out, right, just before launch. And so, in the U.S., of course, that would all be computer controlled with actuators and servos and sensors, and they just got these big arms with counterweights on them that, swing them out of the way. I like to say that, you look at an Apollo spacecraft and a Soyuz, or even a space shuttle and a Soyuz or our station that we led with them, and their old Mir space stations. And you can kind of see the differences, very functional. A Soyuz, for example, doesn't look aerodynamic in the least, not that it needs to be because it's in space, but you look at an Apollo spacecraft, it's nice and clean and sleek. And, one of the stories I like to tell is during that time I went to visit Khrushchev, one of their rocket factories, and outside of Moscow. And, people were just walking around in shirt sleeves working on spacecraft and rockets. And, I was like, there was a rack of kind of a little bit grungy white jackets that I think they put on when NASA came over just to make it look better. And I was horrified to see not only a couple of cats running around the floor, but some ladies putting out dishes of milk for them. And I asked one of our
space cats,
cats in the production area of space, what's going on? And he goes, oh no, they're very important. I said, well, why? He says, well, they catch all the mice. And I said, mice? He said, yeah. He says, we gotta control the mice because they'll chew through the wires. The cats won't.
It adds a new element to concerns about FOD when you're worried about
right.
mice. Wow. There's that apocryphal story, which isn't true, but it could be, that, when the problem was presented, how do you write in space? And people always say, well, NASA invented the Fisher space pen.
Right.
This isn't true. And Russians use the number 2 pencil. And while that isn't a true story, it actually speaks to a truth, doesn't it?
Right. Yep. Yes, absolutely. I like to say, in the West, we build Cadillacs, very capable, but a lot of things to go wrong, a lot of failure modes. And they build a new version of the old reliable pickup truck with crank windows, no air conditioning, but it starts every time.
All right. So when it became possible to get in line for what you guys call increment visits to the space station, or an expedition to the space station,
right?
Were you enthusiastic? Did you raise your hand early on that?
No, I didn't. I was at the time, I was focused on helping to figure out how to build the space station. I wanted to get an assembly mission, which I did on my 3A, which was the second major assembly flight. So I got to go up and help do all that stuff. Now, while I was training, or even before, I was asked by the chief to go and get in line for phase 1, which was sending U.S. astronauts to Mir. And not that I would get to go to Mir, but he wanted me over there training as a backup, and then I would be in line to go fly one of these early expeditions on the new space station, which, back then it was not certainty that this thing was actually going to go. We were actually going to build this thing. The politicians, you can never count on them to keep.
Well, wasn't there one vote that literally came down to one vote?
One vote. Freedom survived by one vote.
Yeah.
And then after it got reformed to be what was originally called Alpha, bring the Russians in probably saved it, because the Congress thought it was a good idea to employ these Russians that suddenly didn't have a Soviet state anymore. And the concern, of course, Bill Clinton was president, and the concern was, well, where are these specialists going to go? Well, they're going to go to Iran, they're going to go to North Korea, and they're going to help them build their missile programs. And so, in hindsight, I think Clinton did the right thing. He said to NASA, find a way to give them $300 million. And it became a lot more, that over the years.
Absolutely.
But, we got to keep these aerospace guys employed. And so that's how we ended up with phase 1 and then phase 2, which became the International Space Station. So I had, Bob Cabana was the chief back then. He was my first shuttle commander too. And I kind of politely told him I'd prefer to stay here and keep flying on space shuttles, and he didn't like that answer, but I was not the first nor the last to say no, and the main reason, there were those uncertainties, but the main reason I said no, and the main reason a lot of other people said no, is because the people that said yes were not getting very good support over in Russia by NASA. And so, I talked to some of those folks that had been out there blazing that trail, and they were pretty unhappy with the lack of support they were receiving from NASA. And so, it wasn't until a few years later when I'd flown another shuttle mission or getting ready to fly my last shuttle mission, that I was approached to, hey, we want you to go be a space station commander. And the program was up and running and getting ready to fly its first crew. In fact, my shuttle mission, STS-92, we were the last mission to, go and add on to the space station. And we landed just 2 weeks before Bill Shepard and his crew, Increment 1, Expedition 1, launched to the station.
So at that time, the early days, when you say NASA wasn't supporting the astronauts that were over there training in Star City, et cetera, where were they deficient?
Well, it was just kind of overall, number one, as an example, Ken Cameron, the first what they call the DOR, Director of Operations in Star City, the U.S. astronaut. He was sent over to be the first DOR, and he couldn't get a desk. He says, the Russians just kind of, well, you can have this unheated room as your office, but there was no desk. He needed a desk, and NASA couldn't figure out how to get him a desk,
There was no GSA to call, so what do we do, right?
Well, and frankly, in those old days, I think the Russians distrusted us as much as we had distrusted them. We were on opposite sides of the Cold War. They weren't interested. And back then, their country was really falling apart. There was a real question of whether, what was it you called back then? The Commonwealth of Independent States was going to be able to even function, and whether these countries, Russia had lost its ability, or almost lost its ability, to collect taxes. The mafia and the oligarchs had taken over. And, there was some real question whether that country would even stay together. And so they didn't have resources, and they weren't interested in helping the Americans too much. And then NASA just, through bureaucracy or, I don't know what it was, probably a combination of like bureaucracy, like not being able to get this guy a desk, and NASA's going to Boeing and one of the support contractors, hey, can you get this guy a desk? Well, we'll have to figure out how to get a desk and ship it over to Russia. It was kind of ridiculous, but, or they couldn't even have him go out and buy a desk, and charge it to the government.
Now, Act 2, the so-called stranded astronauts. There's a joke in the newsroom. It goes like this: never let the facts get in the way of a good story. This idea that Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore were stranded on the International Space Station was never true. And yet my brethren in the media consistently wrote stories that said they were. They always had a way to get home, one way or another, despite the problems with the Boeing Starliner, which turned out to be a very expensive turkey. Yesterday they appeared before the media in Houston, and sorry to disappoint those of you who were expecting them to be angry, to be pointing fingers, to be naming names. Instead, in true astronaut form, they emphasized the fact that they adapted well to their mission, they thanked the team, and they refused to say any bad words about anyone or anything, including Boeing. So I wondered what Leroy thought about all of this. And I wondered also about the real rigors of being in space for a long time, physiologically and psychologically.
Your mission, I believe, was about 190 days.
Yep.
You would know that probably to the minute. But tell me, there's been a lot of talk recently about long-duration spaceflight because of the situation with Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, and the fact that they had about a week-long visit, which turned, kind of Gilligan's Island style, has turned into now approaching a year, it looks like. First of all, give us, I've read a little something about this. There's a book I recommend to everybody out there called Diary of a Cosmonaut by Valentin Lebedev. And he was on Salyut 7 in 1982, I believe it was. And he wrote a very personal and poignant memoir of his experience, and he was on board about as long as you. I think 211 days is the length of time. And there's all kinds of issues that he was dealing with, and Salyut, I think, had a bunch of problems on its own, and it was close quarters. He had interpersonal relationships with his fellow crew member, but there was also this whole kind of disconnect between space and the ground, which I found fascinating. Tell us a little bit about that. And, if you go back to Skylab days, for example, there was actually a mutiny.
A mutiny, right.
Yeah. This whole idea that when you're in space and the ground is telling you what to do, that it sets the stage for some psychological issues. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, sure. No, you're absolutely right. And that book, by the way, I did read before I went on my long duration flight, and it's excellent. It's his diary, as you said, and he talks about friction he has with his crewmate. There were times when they wouldn't speak to each other for days.
Yeah, can you imagine?
And of course, friction with the ground. And the Russians, they used to, back in those days, they would just throw crews together and say, hey, you guys are all professionals, deal with it. And then they learned the hard way that, you got to be careful who you pair together or the crews that you put together. And so when we started, getting ready to fly long duration flights, we thought the same thing. Well, we'll just throw people together like we did on shuttle, and it's all fine. It'll be fine. And the Russians are like, no, you can't do that, And so that's one of the reasons the training flow is so long. You train as a backup before you become prime, is so everyone in that group can kind of get to know each other. And the commanders of the flights are given a lot of input on, oh no, there's no way I want this guy on my crew, or yeah, this guy, I love this guy, And so really in the ISS era, we haven't had very much at all, none that I'm really aware of, interpersonal conflicts on board, right? The crews all kind of get together, get along, and know each other pretty well. So then the friction comes, in my experience, is between the crew and the ground. And it's exactly analogous to, say you work for a big company and you're the team that's over somewhere else negotiating a deal or working a deal, and headquarters is just micromanaging you and telling you what to do. Well, we're in charge, so you do what we say. And that same frustration of doing things, we're at the pointing end of the spear, we're here, I'm telling you, I'm showing you video or photographs of what the issue is, and I want to do it this way, and you're telling me I got to do it another way, which I don't think makes sense, right? And, I can give you all kinds of examples. There was a heat exchanger that was never meant to be accessed. And this is when they were chasing down, why is there some metal in the cooling water umbilicals for the spacesuits? Well, where's this metal coming from? And I forget which metal it was, but they were finding, we had to take samples of water and send them down. And they thought, okay, well, maybe it's coming from this heat exchanger, and maybe it's corroding in a way we didn't expect, and that's where this metal is coming from. So they wanted me to replace it, and it was buried under a lot of stuff, and it was never supposed to be accessed. And they said, okay, well, we're gonna get Salajan to help you, my crewmate, for the entire day. This is an entire day working on this. And they said, well, I don't need him because only one of us can access that space, and he'll be kind of useless. Well, he can at least hand you tools. I'm like, well, I'm going to bring all the tools I need with me. And if I forget one, I'll go back and get it, And so they were insistent. Nope, he's going to help you. He's going to help you. And so I had to talk with Salajan. I said, I don't really need you. And I said, you can have the day off. I gave him the day off. And I went to work, pulled the thing out. Turned out it was not that. The part looked brand new. Replaced it with a new one. Took video of the old one. No corrosion. No, So I don't know what it turned out to be. But that's just one example. It's just so frustrating that I'm telling you I don't need him. He can do other work. No, we're going to make you have him.
So you made the executive decision as the commander, and were there any repercussions?
No, I never told him I gave him the day off. I said, yeah, we're done. Here's the part's been replaced, and here's the old one. You can see it looks brand new. I never told him that I gave him the day off. So
you were there for 190 days, as we said, and that was pretty much what you expected, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And, I imagine if they had said to you, we need you to stay 3 extra months or something like that. What would that have been like, do you think? I assume you've thought about that a little bit since Butch and Suni have been extended.
Sure. Well, it's not the same situation, but just a few months before launch, the Russians came to us, the crew, and NASA, and said, we want you to fly for a year. And it's like, well, why? Well, because we sold your return seat to a tourist, is the real reason. He was this huge Russian guy, wealthy guy. He bought the seats, and we were getting ready to have to go fly for a year instead of 6 months. And we were being told this 2 months before, about 2 months before launch, right? 3 months before launch. And it was interesting because NASA started marching down the path of saying, okay, and starting to sell it like, oh, we really want data at 1 year, very much like they did for Scott Kelly, and which was the same thing. It wasn't true. Basically, they had sold his seat to Sarah Brightman. Right? And
Yep.
in our case, he was physically so large, he didn't fit in the spacecraft. He just didn't fit. Like during entry, his knees were jammed up against a control panel, and it's 100% that once you impact the Earth, both his knees would be broken. Right? So
Wow.
he physically couldn't fly. So we didn't have to fly for a year. Scott was, NASA already made a big deal about how much science they're going to get out of these 1 year missions, which is not really true because all our data are at 6 month points, right? So we want to build that N up so that we can draw some conclusions. Suddenly you fly these guys for a year. Well, you've got one outlier set of data over here. It doesn't really compare much to, what you're already doing. And so anyway, by the time Sarah Brightman dropped out, it was too late. We had already sold the 1 year flight. And I remember Bill Gerstenmaier, back in the day I was on the part of the NASA Advisory Council. And I asked him in one of the meetings, I said, oh, now that Sarah Brightman's dropped out, you're going to bring Scott home after 6 months? And he just chuckled. It was too late. We had already made all these reasons of how we're going to get to Mars because of Scott's flight and, all that stuff.
Yeah, they had already sold the film.
But
as it were.
it was a shock when they said we want you to fly for a year. I'm like, oh my God, we've been training for almost 3.5 years, and I'm like, I don't want to stay up there for a year, But I mean, what am I going to do? Resign from the flight? I'm not going to do that. But I was like, we're going to be up there for a year. I mean, not the least of my thoughts were, we already know it's kind of bad for you to be up there for 6 months. I really don't want to spend 12 months up there, but. Fortunately for us, it worked out that we came home after 6. But yeah, I mean, for Suni and Butch, expecting to fly a 10-day flight, and actually maybe 6 months. Unfortunately, both of them have flown long-duration flights before, so they knew what it was like, and they were trained and would be able to adapt. But the disruption to your personal plans and your family and everything else. But astronauts were trained to be adaptable, right? We're supposed to adapt to unexpected situations and make it work, and that's exactly what they've done.
No question about that, and that they are, troopers for sure. There's no question, but it's got to be difficult when you get extended like that. I mean, have you thought about, well, put it this way: by all accounts, they seem to have assimilated well with the crew, and they're doing their thing.
Yep.
But when it becomes open-ended like that, I don't, what goes through your mind,
Right. I mean, I knew pretty much when we were coming home, and if they had just launched us and said, well, we don't know when we're bringing you down, that would have been a lot tougher, because in my experience and most people's experience that I've talked to, 3-4 months is probably kind of the optimal, this is pretty cool, but I wouldn't mind going home now, right? But 6 months, all right, a couple more months, that's fine, no big deal. But then if it becomes, well, actually, how about a year?
Frank Rubio couldn't go down because of problems with his
coolant.
Soyuz, the coolant.
Yeah.
And it didn't get nearly as much play as this, but it's a very similar scenario, isn't it?
Yes, right. And so, so if it happens, bad luck, but we'll make the best of it, right? I can see that if we were getting ready to come home and they said, oh, by the way, we've had some issues with our traffic models and you guys are going to have to stay another 6. That would have been much.
Well, I think, that would test your fortitude for sure. Yeah. It's funny you were talking about the, Scott Kelly's 1 year flight and, the data gathering. It kind of reminds me of flying John Glenn to learn everything we can about aging in space. These data points of one don't really work that well, do they?
It kind of amazed me that how much of the public just bought it.
Yeah.
And I think they still think that those flights meant something and helped.
It's unfortunate that NASA falls into that trap of trying to make science where there really isn't science. It's not,
Right.
It's really, I don't think it's necessary to sell the program, as it were, you know. But why not just say, hey, we're going to give John Glenn a flight because he deserves it. He's an American hero. That would have been okay too, right? You know, yeah. Okay, so the term that has come up though is that Suni and Butch are stranded or stuck in space. I know NASA bridles at that, but in a way, it's true, isn't it?
Well, in a way, it's true because they are there, right? But if there was an emergency, they would have gotten in that Boeing spacecraft and come down. There was enough confidence that that Boeing spacecraft could make it back safely. So once you have an emergency on board and there's a bigger risk of staying, then you're going to take the lesser risk and come down on that capsule. But as it was, there was no emergency, and so they felt confident that they could bring the capsule back empty, and just add the seats to the existing spacecraft for an emergency after the capsule left. And Suni and Butch could come home with, the Dragon crew. And then that turned into, well, we're just going to take 2 people off the next flight and make Butch and Suni those 2, that are going to stay long duration. And then that doesn't, because it's a matter of also, hey, we can't just produce another spacecraft quickly and, be ready to go in a few weeks. It takes some time to build a new spacecraft. So, so that's the situation that we're seeing. So they are not really stuck because they can come back in an emergency. It's all set up now for them to come down in a SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. But just out of convenience in the traffic model, they have to wait till the next flight.
There was that period of time after the Starliner left and before their new spacecraft came on board, which I guess they would have had to kind of bungee themselves into.
Yeah.
That would have been kind of weird. But
that would have been pretty drastic. They would have had to just be in the vehicle and somehow secure themselves as best they could. But not ideal situation. But the chances of an evacuation were pretty small.
Exactly. Well, what about now? I was looking at the numbers, and I think Peggy Whitson still is the all-time duration leader aggregate, I believe.
Probably, yeah.
And I don't think Suni's going to quite get to that point, but she's going to be in the neighborhood. And I know Butch has a little less time and space, but what concerns are there about kind of the aggregate exposure to low Earth orbit like that? I mean, I assume you're taking on more radiation for one thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's the biggest thing that we are concerned about is, how much radiation we're getting, because obviously we're still pretty well protected because we're under the Van Allen belts and the magnetosphere. But the amount of radiation is significantly higher than here on Earth, right? The reason life exists on Earth is we have this wonderful atmosphere that, basically stops all the particles from coming down and preventing life from happening. So, we are concerned about radiation, but there's not much we can do about it, right? And during my mission, for example, we had a large solar event, and, even days later, the radiation detectors were showing background levels 10 times higher than normal, right? We were advised during certain parts of the orbit for a while to go shelter ourselves in the more shielded areas, which, is kind of more of a placebo than anything else. Shielding radiation is a very tricky technical problem, not an easy thing to do. It's not just a matter of putting up, blocks of lead, which we don't have anyway because they're heavy, massive. But, so I don't really know what the longer terms.
Space dog,
Leica. Oh, sorry.
It's Astro.
Yeah. Sorry. But there are a lot of other effects. Like not long after my mission, we started observing astronauts coming, having vision changes in space, right?
Yeah. Did that happen to you?
Problems, right?
Did that happen to you?
It didn't happen to me. But as time went on, we've started seeing like well over 70% of people who fly long flights have some issues with their vision. And in some cases, they've had permanent eye damage, right? And and we still don't really understand. We've got some ideas. It's probably related to the fluid shift, but it's interesting that I don't think even today, I don't think a woman has had it. And it may just be that we haven't flown as many women to see it. or maybe there's something different about their physiology that they're immune from it, right? We also don't know if, some people reach a plateau and with their vision, degradation, other people don't. Is that going to keep going until someone's blind if you send them on a trip to Mars? I mean, so we still don't have a smoking gun. We've got some ideas of what it probably is related to, like I said, this fluid shift. But other things they've noticed recently, and I'm not an MD, so I can't speak intelligently on it, but there was a condition where the blood flow they found accidentally in an astronaut was going in the wrong way, in an artery, one particular artery. And on the Earth, that's a huge deal.
Wow.
It's indicative of some kind of a well-understood issue. But of course, that was not what's happening in space. But, this person's totally fine. And so
the wrong direction in an artery.
Yeah,
and your system could adapt to that somehow in space? Really?
Yeah, and all the doctors go, oh, yeah, they all know about it. They all know about it on Earth. It's caused by this disease or this issue.
Right.
But of course, that wasn't the same reason it was happening in space, and they said, well, so I guess this has been going on more often than we knew. We just happened to be doing an ultrasound on this person in this area, and the blood flow was going the wrong way.
I had not heard about that one. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I forget what it's called.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a medical term for it.
Yeah.
It's well understood here on Earth, but and it's a big deal here on Earth.
See, you have radiation, you got the vision issue, you've got the reverse artery routine, you've got other cardiovascular concerns. Your immunity is lowered, I believe, right? And
yeah, that's what I've heard too. Is that your immune system, you have a higher white cell count and a lower red cell count in space. People have anecdotally said that if they cut themselves, it seems to take longer to heal. And is that because of particulates that are floating around, kind of keeping it from closing up, or we don't know.
So, would you say there? You flew now. I think you landed in 2005, if I recall, right? Mm-hmm. So it's been 20 years.
Long time, yeah.
Can you believe that? Wow. So, would you say
years.
you have any effects still as a result, or have they all gone away?
No, I had no long-term effects. After a week, I felt pretty good after coming down because we really took the exercise before, during, and after seriously. And I've had, zero effects that I felt. So knock on wood, everything's still okay. The exercise seems to have, in my case anyway, had immeasurable bone loss. The DEXA scans and all the things they do, they said, well, any difference we see is within the precision of the measurement, so we can't measure any bone loss on you. So the exercise seems to work, at least for me. You're
such an overachiever, Leroy.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, what's funny is my eyesight. I want to say maybe 5 years ago, or maybe a little longer, suddenly started getting better.
Really?
And I'm still not wearing cheaters, and I can see far again. Even when I fly my airplane, I don't need glasses. And the optometrist, the NASA optometrist, said, "Well, this, it's not totally unusual. Like this happens sometimes, and some people get older, their vision gets better." He says, "But in your case, your one eye got really sharp, but you can't read too well through it. But your other eye, it didn't get as good, so you can still read without cheaters."
Wow.
So he goes, I wish I had your eyes.
It's like those people that have put one contact in, right?
Right. I did that for many years, actually. And what I would do is I would alternate eyes because they were about the same. And I would alternate which eye to train my brain to take either one.
I tried that for a little while. Because for the teleprompter and stuff. And
right.
I don't know. It was maybe a little dizzy, actually. Yeah, I think you got to get through a process. Yeah, you got to get used to it. Ronald Reagan, I think, was a one contact guy.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, that's how he could read his blue cards. Anyway, so little pro tips there. So when you're up there, thinking about what it's like day to day on the space station, you have a lot of tasks. There's a lot of things to keep you busy. But is there a certain boredom and isolation and routine that sets in that in other words, is there sort of a space station malaise that can take hold if you don't watch it?
I think it's possible, but the fact is we are scheduled every minute of the day, including our breaks. You have a 5-minute break here, 10-minute break here. But yes, you definitely get into a routine. A lot of the things they have you do can get you frustrated. You spend a lot of time doing logistics, going and finding things that are lost or, to be thrown away, to make room for the new stuff that's coming. And it's important things to do, right? But, it gets frustrating, like the drugs expired in your huge, medical kit. So it's not just a simple matter of taking this bottle of pills and replacing it with this bottle. Well, the bottles are big and bulky and heavy, so they send them up, shrink wrapped in plastic. So now you got to open these things up and take one pill at a time and replace the pills in the bottle, throw the pills in the bottle away, and it takes a lot of time.
With no gravity.
With no gravity. It takes a lot of time. And one of the things that made me really frustrated was they spent days asking me to go find these batteries. They had been put they had been put in the Progress vehicle for disposal. I think they're already in there, and I couldn't find them. They said we need you. We think it's over in this part of the Progress, before it undocks, and I'm like. And finally, I literally spent about 2 days looking for it, like doing almost nothing else except looking for these batteries. And finally, I asked them, I was like, well, why are these batteries so important? Did they get thrown away accidentally? Oh, no. We just want to make sure they're not near the hull of the vehicle. I said, well, okay, but why is that important? And because the Progress, of course, you load it up with all the garbage, it undocks, and then everything burns up in the atmosphere, right?
Right.
And you're like that. Well, we don't want those batteries. If they're too near the wall, they'll exceed their temperature limit and they could explode. I'm like,
this is
the whole spacecraft is
spacecraft is.
And you just have to spend 2 days looking for these batteries because they might get a little warm before the whole thing breaks up.
And this is where you end up, detesting these people on the ground if you don't watch it, right?
Yes, right. Absolutely. It was so important to find these batteries. And I'm just like, and actually I heard a story about another astronaut after me who got so frustrated because, on the board, we used to have these huge Ziploc bags. You're like 3 feet by 3 feet. And they were really great for like packing clothes in that you wanted to keep, right? And instead of throwing them away, like your nice polo shirts with your logo on it. And so you'd pack these, your shirts in these Ziplocs and throw them in these bags for return, on the shuttle, when the shuttle would fly again. And then you could get your shirts back, right? And so this one astronaut, after I flew, he kept asking the ground, hey, I need some more of these. Can you ship some more of these up on the next supply ship? And they kept kind of putting them off. And he finally got frustrated. And he's like, well, what's the deal? Why won't you send up any more of these bags? He said, well, safety won't sign off on it. He goes, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, it's a suffocation hazard. You might get stuck inside of it and suffocate. And just like, what? and I could tell you a lot of stories like this. Like during our flight, the Russians used a lot of canned food items, and so we have just commercial can openers, right? Twist can openers, and they were used so much they were wearing out. Like we had to start using our Swiss Army knives to to open cans. And so we told the ground, hey, we need can openers. You need to send us some more can openers. Well, NASA safety wouldn't buy off on it because when you open a can, you leave a sharp edge, and we might cut ourselves. Like, well, it's either that or we're not eating. And so we solved the problem because NASA safety wouldn't sign off on it. A couple of guys, a couple of just support folks in Moscow went to a grocery store, bought a couple of can openers, handed them to the Russians. The Russians sent them down to Baikonur, put them in the vehicle. Boom. We had
instant can opener. Which speaks again to the distinct cultures of the two programs, doesn't it? Right.
Well, I'll tell you another quick story that brought to mind. Before we launched, not long before we launched, had a briefing from some of the equipment people, and this one gal took good pleasure in telling me, well, just to let you know, the Russian toilet paper is a little bit in short supply, so you have to, kind of be aware of that, not use, try to conserve it. I said, okay, all right, but why can't we send more? well, she goes, well, actually, we're working on that, but there's plenty of American toilet paper. I'm like, well, if there's plenty of American toilet paper, then there's no issue, right? Well, yeah, you can use it, but you can't throw it in the Russian toilet. Why not? It's not certified. And
Certified
she said
by
that with a straight face. And I'm like, so what are we supposed to do with the used toilet paper? Well, you can throw it in the wet trash, oh, okay, so I'm going to, I just kind of smiled and said, okay, got it.
certified.
Well, once we got up there, we broke out the American toilet paper, used it, threw it in the uncertified manner into the Russian toilet, which, when the canister's full, it gets bolted up and put in the progress to be burned up in the atmosphere. And, sometimes you just got to go along and not fight it. Why, you see what the solution is. Just like I said, I gave Saljan the day off. When we started running low on Russian toilet paper, broke out the American toilet paper.
Not certified. I'm curious, I wonder what the entity is that would certify toilet paper.
I don't know.
For that purpose, I wonder, certified by whom, I wonder, right?
Yeah, these are just little examples of what's kind of endemic at organizations like NASA.
Yeah.
You've got so many rules and regulations, and no one is allowed to use any judgment except, those of us who are going. If we followed everything we were told, we'd never get anything done.
This was a great segue to Act 3 of this podcast, Leroy on NASA's present and future. The agency is facing a pivotal moment, to say the least, under the Trump-Musk administration. They have nominated Jared Isaacman to be the next NASA administrator. Isaacman is an intriguing choice. He is a self-made billionaire. He created a company called Shift4 in his basement when he was in high school. But his passion has really always been about aviation and space. He's an accomplished pilot of high-performance fighters. He's purchased a trio of flights from Elon Musk's SpaceX. He's flown 2 of them already on Dragon capsules. On the second one, he conducted the first commercial/civilian spacewalk. He has a flight on the books to lead the crew of the giant Starship spacecraft on its first piloted mission. Now that he's headed for the corner office at NASA, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In any case, it's a big shift at NASA from old space to new, from the silent generation to millennial. And with Musk pulling so many strings in this administration, it seems like all bets are off at NASA. There's talk of deep sixing the space station before 2030. There's talk of bypassing the moon entirely, going straight to Mars. There's talk of canceling the boondoggle Space Launch System, SLS rocket. And of course, there are deep cuts headed for NASA's science enterprise, much to the chagrin of a lot of us who care about that. Leroy has some interesting thoughts on all of this.
What would you do to reinvigorate NASA? Because I always think about Gulliver being, tied down by the Lilliputians, rule by rule over time, certification of toilet paper, whatever it might be, or can openers. All these things have tied down this organization, which was at one time, I think you could make the case, the most entrepreneurial bureaucracy in the history of the U.S. government, right? When it had this distinct mission and it had unlimited funds and it was honoring the wishes of a martyred president and the Cold War context, all those things lined up. Those things are never going to happen again. And NASA has really not figured out how to be appropriately risky in that world. So what would you do to fix that?
Yeah, that's a huge task. I mean, I've never met Jared Isaacman, but I've heard nothing but good things about him. He's the right choice, I think, to try to shake things up. Now, having said that, the task is daunting, right? Because to put this into context, the United States went from nothing, no NASA, no astronauts, no rockets, no spacecraft, no launch pads, to landing humans on the moon in just under 11 years, right?
It's amazing.
I mean, think about that.
Yeah,
That's
it is. It's incredible.
The current exploration program, which started in 2004 after the Columbia accident, was started in 2004. Here we are, 21 years later, we still have not flown a single astronaut to space on the new program. right? That puts it in context.
It's a pretty
Also,
sad statement. It really
it's a sad
is.
statement. And, you know, the heavy lift booster, the SLS, you know, it uses space shuttle main engines as its main engines, the RS-25s. And the reason it used it, not because they were the best engines, but they happened to be available, right? Because we were going to mothball the shuttle program or end the shuttle program. And so it took Rocketdyne a full, and these are reusable engines. They have to be rebuilt, but they're reusable. It took Rocketdyne a full 10 years to certify them to be thrown away, right? To go on this vehicle, use them, throw them away.
Is that the same entity that does toilet paper? I wonder.
Well, here's,
That does that
here's
certification.
the problem.
Why on earth?
Why?
Why
Yeah,
on earth, if they were certified to fly repeated missions, why
Yep.
would it take 10
Why would
years,
it take 10 years
to
to
say it's
certify?
okay to fly these things
And
once?
throw them away. Yeah. And here's this kind of speaks to what I'm getting at, which is after Apollo, you know, whole huge swaths of workforce were let go, right? Contracts ended, workforce let go. Same thing happened at the end of the shuttle program, although not as severe because, you know, a lot of contracts, you know, for example, the entire Kennedy Space Center was under the shuttle contract. Once shuttle went away, oh, we're going to save all these billions of dollars a year. No, you're not. You still got to run KSC, you know, so the station program has to pick that up. So you're not saving that much money, you know. I mean, literally the shuttle program paid for the grass to be cut at KSC. You know, everything at KSC was under the shuttle program. And so what happened is after Apollo, all these people, all these contracts ended because we succeeded, right? And so then it has changed to become a jobs program. Why did it take Rocketdyne 10 years to certify the engine? Well, they needed to keep their employees paid, needed to keep contract money coming in the front door. You know, why is Boeing's overhead rate so high? You know, why are they, you know, why is it taking so long to do things? Well, it is bureaucracy, it is red tape, but it's also a built-in conflict of interest. And that's why contracts with SpaceX has gone so quickly, is because, first of all, unlike, not, you know, contrary to popular understanding or misunderstanding, they're not getting all these billions of dollars to develop these spacecraft. They are being paid for services, you know, like on the crews that go up and down on Dragon spacecraft, they receive prepayments for those services to help them develop and certify the spacecraft, and which they've done. And now they're fulfilling their part of the contract and flying crews to and from, right? And so they've already been paid for most of that activity, unlike the model with, you know, the traditional aerospace company where, hey, it's cost plus, and we just, you know, you need more, we'll just, you know, amend the contract, we'll give you a new contract, and we'll just keep you going, right? So we've got that built-in conflict of interest of not wanting to succeed because then things change, right? And you're not getting the big bucks anymore.
Perverse incentives.
Right,
you know?
reverse incentives, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Part of it is the bureaucracy, the red tape, like the certified toilet paper. So, you know, a guy like Isaacman, he can come in and try to change things, but the inertia of this monster, you know, this combined monster, I don't envy him that position and trying to change course. You know, it's daunting if you think about it. You know, just all the interests, all the companies, aerospace companies that have their lobbyists and you know, lobbying their politicians to keep things going. Otherwise, you're going to lose jobs in your state. You know, we're going to have to shut down this plant. They're talking about closing or consolidating some NASA centers. You know, maybe doing away with Ames, and there was another one, Ames, and they wanted to consolidate Ames and another one into Huntsville. You know, close two centers, and just imagine the howls from those, you know, politicians in those states, especially in those districts, right? So I don't know how you solve this problem. It's I wouldn't be confident that I could, you know, I mean, unless you go in and just start, you know, closing things and changing things. Boy, you're going to make a lot of enemies real quick, and you're going to be out of a job, or worse, they'll find something to smear you with to make sure you're out of a job.
It makes the rocket science part look easy.
Oh God, yeah.
You know, it really does.
I think
You've got 10 centers, all the congressional districts there, you know, some red, some blue, but each of those members of Congress has a vested interest in keeping those jobs, and really it is completely separate from any desire to explore beyond Earth. It is purely jobs.
Yeah, well, Senator Shelby, he's retired now, but he wanted to make sure that big rocket got built, and for Alabama, for Alabama's sake, and it did get built. And so, but you look at, just look at the architecture that NASA has put together to go to the moon, right? So, SLS is going to launch an Orion, and it's going to rendezvous with, it's going to fly somewhere, rendezvous with a Starship, and then, or Starship technology, and then go down to the surface, right? It's like, well, why are we doing that? Why don't we just all launch on the Starship together? I
would presume, Mr. Isaacman might make that point, right? But again, there are members of Congress and constituencies and big defense players, aerospace defense players that are involved here. But if you could take away all those things, would you cancel the SLS program and just kind of double down on getting to the moon and Mars on Starship?
Absolutely. Look at what we've got here. The idea was maybe you could do this more quickly, but it didn't turn out to be more quickly at all. SLS only flew, a year and a half ago?
The fact that there's no attempt at reusability is to me a fundamental flaw.
Yeah. You throw the whole thing away. With the NASA's, or the GA, was it the OMB or was it NASA's own analysis that showed it was like $4 billion a pop, $4.5 billion a pop?
Yeah.
Thrown away.
Yeah.
That includes development costs.
It's not exactly sustainable, is it?
Yeah.
So, what about the station itself? Is it time to deorbit, or would you want to try to keep that going longer potentially?
I would.
We're at the end of the life right now.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing some issues with the Russian segment. The cracks they're finding in the hull, the leaks. Slow air leaks, but still cause for concern. So I don't know how much longer it can go. It'll be 30 years in 2030, which is the planned end of life. Those Russian modules, they're the same modules that were used on Mir and used in Salyut. And they were originally only designed for 6 years of life. And Mir, after 12 years, was really falling apart, So, in a way, it's a bit of a miracle that we've stretched those modules to almost, 25 years, and will be 30 years when we're done. So it'll probably be about time then, unless we can, I think the U.S. segment is still in good shape, and so I don't know I don't think there's a very practical way of bolting on some new hardware, when the Russians quit and continuing. But, so these commercial space stations that are supposed to be built, the whole idea is they're going to come online before 2030, at least one of them, right? And so, I'm nervous about that because I'm not sure we're going to get there with, I'll be pleasantly surprised if we have one commercial space station by 2030 that's flying and functioning, So that kind of puts into question, well, where are we going as a nation for exploration in space? Because if we don't have a station to go to, we've got Dragon spacecraft, we could do these little 1 week flights like Jared Isaacman's been paying for. Exploration program, well, I don't know. It's a big question mark for me.
So here we are, new administration, new leader at NASA. I don't detect you're very optimistic about the future of the agency.
I am somewhat hopeful, and I wish Isaacman the best. I know he's going to try to do stuff, but probably politically pretty inexperienced, right?
Right.
Certainly in American politics, and I hope he can. I hope he can have an effect. But just thinking about all he's up against, the lobbyists, the members of Congress, the other vested interests in keeping things the way they are. you know, yeah, he's got a. Hopefully, he doesn't have any skeletons in his closet they can find and pull out.
Because they will find him.
They will find him, or they'll make him up and try to make him stick.
It's brutal. All right, Leroy, thank you. This has been great. A little more wide-ranging than I expected, but Leroy Chiao, thank you for your time, as always.
No, my pleasure. Great talking to you, Miles, as always.
What a fun conversation that was. My good friend Leroy Chiao. Always candid. He never pulls his punches. Always the straight gouge. Lots of great insights there. Some things I didn't know. Your blood can flow the wrong way in space. And who does certify the toilet paper? Open questions for future episodes. As you can tell, Leroy is good at telling great stories. And that's what he does for a living these days. Check him out at oneorbit.com. He and a group of other astronauts will give you a fantastic program offering them insights on spaceflight and how that relates to motivating workers and doing better here on planet Earth. Once again, that's at oneorbit.com. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. I'm Miles O'Brien, and this has been Miles to Go. We'll see you next time.